Teşekkür ederim.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Today, we gather for a very special occasion, the first of our two-part event series held in memory of Cornell Fleischer and in celebration of the donation of his remarkable collection to the Sunakaraç Library. Earlier this year, a total of 1869 materials from Professor Fleischer's collection were donated to our library. Since their arrival, our team has been working with great care to process, catalog, and prepare the materials for use. I am very pleased to share that around 1188 items are already ready to meet our users, and we are doing everything we can to make the entire collection accessible as soon as possible. We would like to express our sincere gratitude to everyone who helped bring this invaluable collection to Snackrash Library. Today's session focuses on Cornell Fleischer on the Mediterranean and Islamic lens. We are honored to be joined by distinguished speakers, Kaya Şahin from the Ohio State University, who will also serve as our moderator, Ertuğrul Ökten from Istanbul Medeniyet University, Evrim Binbaş from Universitat Bonn, and Maite Green Mercado from Rutgers University, New York. But unfortunately, Maite is unable to be with us today due to a recent surgery, and we send her our warmest wishes for a speedy recovery. On this day, as we commemorate the life and the scholarship of Cornell Fleischer, I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to all our speakers for being here. Before giving the floor to Kaya Şahin, let me share a few technical notes for our participations. Your cameras and microphones will remain automatically disabled. If you have any questions, please type them in chat box. During the Q&A session, our speakers will address them. I would like to also to note that the recording of this event will be shared on the Snokrach Library's YouTube channel. And now I would like to pass the word to Kaya Şahin to begin the session. The floor is yours, Kaya Bey.
Thank you so much for organizing this event. The idea of it came from the Sunakaraç Library colleagues who have been really working very, very hard to make sure that Cornell's books are cataloged on time. And obviously, as Cornell's students and friends and colleagues, we were very much pleased. And we decided that instead of a single panel, we should have two different panels. Since Cornell saw himself as a historian of the Islamic world, including but also beyond the Ottomans, we found it appropriate to have two separate discussions about two different kinds of legacies and intellectual traditions he represents. So today in the first panel, we are going to talk about Cornell as a historian of Islamic studies, as I said, including but beyond the Ottomans. And we have two people with us. Our third panelist, unfortunately, couldn't join us today. We wish all the best to our friend Maite Green Mercado. We have Ertuğrul Ökten and Evrim Binbaş, who are the best people that I can imagine to talk about Cornell's legacy as Cornell's students and Cornell's colleagues, but also as specialists in their own of Islamic societies and late medieval and early modern Islamic history. It's very difficult to introduce both of them because they are very multifaceted scholars. They taught at multiple institutions. They inspired different people in different countries. They have been wonderful teachers and mentors to a lot of people. So I'll just present both of them in a brief snapshot. Ertuğrul Ökten, who is our first presenter today, is currently teaching at Istanbul Medeniyet University. He's a specialist of Timurid history. He started out as an Ottomanist, and he executed that transition that very few people do, which is not to leave the Ottomans behind necessarily, but to switch to the study of another Islamic or Islamic society and culture. Ertuğrul, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And perhaps before anything, I should say that the two volumes you may be able to notice to my left and right, second shelf from the top, are Encyclopedia of Islam, Milli Eğitim Bakanlığı MEP, and they come from Cornell Hoca's library. Well, I didn't steal them. I acquired them before he passed away. And I am really proud. I am proud and getting more and more proud due to my possession of them, actually. But that personal note put aside, they remind me of his approach to knowledge. And let me say that although I have read the topic of this session before a couple of times, what I have for you is mostly a general description of Cornell Hoca. And if you want me to talk more on on his historianship as a historian of the Mediterranean and Islamic lands, you'll have to push me a little bit. But his personality and his historianship, as I can see now, are not really detached from each other. And for the moment, I'm going to call it a holistic approach. A holistic approach means not singling out one thing, for example, not singling out Ottoman history, but seeing it with the largest context possible. So, for example, tonight, when we described him as a historian of the Islamic world and the Mediterranean, I was thinking to myself, well, he also has this global historian side to him. And I hadn't thought of him as such earlier. But now, when I look at the institution he worked in, when I looked at the development of global history, I can very well situate him in global history too. And this is a complex business. Actually, not only global history is complex, Ottoman history is complex, Mediterranean history is complex, Islamic history is complex. And one of the things I guess he impressed us, his students, most is his ability to recognize this complexity and then giving its due, like learning the languages, being fluent with the languages, and then developing the methodology for that. And I personally, and I'm sure you too, owe him a lot in that respect, sound methodology. If we start talking about methodology, well, the first rule was probably respect the sources. Know the sources, respect the sources. And again, I cannot conceive this without his personality. And one of the most wonderful things with Cornell Hoca is that his career, his profession, and his personality went together so seamlessly. I hope I'm not exaggerating. And I hope I'm not just composing a eulogy in the manner of those literary people that we follow in history. But this is really what I see, so please forgive me if I sound a bit like, I don't know, exaggerating things. But sincerely, appreciating the complexity, when you interacted with him, he would try to show all of these complexity, some of which we wouldn't understand. But then, in interacting with us, he appreciated our complexities too as human beings. And I guess that's one of the main reasons we became attached to him. Like, he took us as real people, as real human beings, and treated us as such. Now, is that relevant? If you want to be a good teacher, I think that is relevant. It's not just conveying ideas. It's not just, quote-unquote, teaching things to someone else. It's also showing by example. So when I think about what I have seen from Cornell Hoca, I think he did that really well. He was in Bosnia. He loved being in Istanbul. That was perhaps his favorite city in the world. He loved his field, physically the field, the Ottoman lands, the Mediterranean, whatever. So his reality was a physical reality and an intellectual reality at the same time. And these basically resonated among themselves. I guess that's why the ultimate synthesis was a striking one. Whenever he wrote or whenever he spoke, that's how he came up with some of the most brilliant ideas. So he gave us the examples of highest intellectual standards, and also he showed us history actually cultivates empathy for the people you study or those scholars who have studied them. So this was actually a spectrum of empathy or a spectrum of respect. You knew how to respect the sources. You knew how to respect the scholars who studied them, early scholars, historical figures perhaps, or modern scholars, and then you respect the scholars or to be scholars who were studying them at the moment, together with them, at his present. And I think that's why intellectual history suited him really well. It was kind of a mode of being for Cornell Hoca, and all of these came together in his personality. One of the things I liked a lot with him was also his openness to new ideas. And if I've gone beyond Ottoman history, first I should give credit to Evrim, but I should also give a lot of credit to, Evrim is the person who gave my dissertation topic, who gave me my dissertation topic. But without Cornell Hoca's lack of hesitation in making that leap, it wouldn't be easy, of course. I mean, especially coming from these lands, Ottoman history is the mode of being. It's the way to exist for a to-be historian, I think. But if there are people with you, behind you, who lead the way, who say it's of course possible, then it becomes so easy. And Cornell Hoca was one of the most important people who allowed me to do that. And having said giving credit, I guess here we have to give credit to Martin Dixon too. But that's a topic for another session, I guess. Martin Dixon, and I'll call it the Princeton Circle, but as I've said, that can wait a little bit, perhaps. As for his openness to ideas, I kind of still envy him for that. I wish I can do the same. I'm still hopeful. I'm trying. But his use of hagiography, for example, his approach to hagiography as validated source of information or validated, legitimate mode of thinking was eye-opening for, I guess, all of us. But maybe a more major, more important step was his redefining of the historical framework. And the first impressive example came with his book, Bureaucrat and Intellectual, historian Mustafa Ali. But then he did that more than once, a couple of times, I guess. His search in Messianism across Mediterranean, across Europe, is also, I guess, another example of redefining historical framework for Ottoman studies. It was quite novel at the time. So he was kind of a pathfinder. He showed us numerous paths that we hadn't realized before, and then not only he walked those paths, but he also allowed us to walk those paths. So there is one more thing I'd like to add, and I think this is maybe the most critical of all, perhaps. If I wanted to summarize all of this, I would summarize this as his love of learning, ilim aşkı. Now, I think this is extremely important because when, we asked the question why he did all these, because I've talked about personality, I've talked about his standards, I've talked about his approach, but the crucial thing in the center of all of this was, I think, his love of learning. And I'm going to use the Turkish phrase ilim aşkı again, because this is how I heard it from Cornell Hoca. This aşk for learning, was something real for him, and he lived in it, and he practiced that. It was an inner desire, an inner natural desire to know, to understand, to explore. And I think this passion shaped everything he did as a scholar, as a teacher, and as a human being. And that's why I think, guys, he set one of the best examples for us, his students and his fellow human beings. And I'd like to stop here, if I may.
Thank you, Ertuğrul, for this wonderful introduction. I realize it's actually more appropriate for you to talk about his personality and his approach to the sources as an introduction. So this is very well placed, actually. So thank you so much. Our next speaker is Evrim Binbaş. Many of you know his book, which is becoming a classic in the field, Intellectual Networks in Timurid Iran, Şerafeddin Ali Yazdi and the Islamic Republic of Letters, published in 2016 with Cambridge University Press. His publications extend over the entire gamut of late medieval and early modern Islamic history. A true Fleischerian student, I would say, but also as a testimony to his other mentor, John Woods. The sources he utilizes include everything from numismatics to hard-to-locate manuscripts. And the final piece of introduction I want to mention is, as historians, we love mystery stories. So I would like to invite everybody to have a look at his most recent piece of writing in the Journal of the Economic and Social History of the Orient. He co-authored it with Devin Davies. It is called A Missing Source on 18th Century Central Asia Rediscovered. The Istanbul manuscript of the works of Seyyid Nasireddin el-Marginani, when you have a look at it, you will realize where people like Umberto Eco or Jorge Luis Borges are finding their true inspiration. It is a wonderful history of loss and rediscovery. Without further ado, Evrim Binbaş.
Thank you very much for this very generous introduction. And also, I would like to thank Koç University for and congratulate them for saving and acquiring Cornell's library. I think I should say that it's a great acquisition. Most people who visited Cornell in his office will know that he had a good collection in Ottoman studies. But those who were fortunate enough to see his house and in his library would know that he actually had much broader interests, and his collection will be a great sort of addition to Istanbul's, I think, intellectual environment. I mean, personally, I have seen the full set of Encyclopedia Iranica for the first time in his house. He had the complete print collection before it turned into a digital collection. So this is a wonderful news for all who work in Istanbul or who go to Istanbul to do work. Today, I should say, I mean, we have to be personal, of course, when we talk about Cornell. I have been thinking of him whole day, not only for this event today, but as you may know, the Pope Leo XIV is visiting Turkey today. And I have been watching the sort of ceremonies in Istanbul, because there's a sort of grand ceremony attended by all the churches of Turkey and the Middle East, and of course Pope XIV. And each church tradition presented their musical examples. And I remembered that Cornell was a strange obsession with Christmas music. So we all know that. So whenever we went to his house, not only at the time of Christmas and not only during the Christmas time, but whole year, you go to his house and he would listen to Christmas music.
And Gesualdo, motets,
Yes,
that
exactly.
kind of stuff. Like,
So
yeah.
I was thinking of this event today, and then watching the ceremony, and then I kept thinking of um, him and his love for Christmas music. I don't know why and the origin of it. I never asked Cornell, but I never saw him listening to any other type of music, I should say. He only listened to the Christmas carols. So that's one interesting coincidence for today. Secondly, these talks have to be personal because Cornell published on his interests, but he didn't leave us many writings on historiographical subjects, like how to study history kind of thing. So we have to rely on his own writings to find out what he thought about methodology and how we should understand how we should study history in different periods. Personally, unlike Ertuğrul, I guess, when I went to Chicago, I had already decided that I would focus on Iran and Central Asia. So I didn't go to Chicago to study Ottoman Empire and then switch sides. And my proposal was actually one of the masters of Bahauddin Naqshband in Bukhara. So I was already I had already decided on my subject. But Cornell never and never and never felt me, I never felt excluded when I talked to him about my interests. This was revealing and very surprising for me, because when I studied in Ankara, the people around me found my interest very strange. And even someone told me, like, you are a nice person, smart, you know language, so why do you want to focus on Central Asia? So why don't you study 19th century Ottoman Empire or 20th century Republic of Turkey? So that tension never happened in Chicago, never happened with Cornell. So in that sense, um, for him, I was just a historian, and he actually appreciated the fact that I focused on something else, on a different subject other than the Ottoman Empire. In fact, when I slightly changed my not slight, I significantly changed my dissertation subject. In the middle of the road, because initially I was going to work on the Oğuzhan narratives. And then I switched my subject to Şerafettin Ali Yazdi. Actually, that happens under his guidance, because one semester he went to Lawrence, Kansas. He was a guest researcher, I guess, at the University of Kansas. And I guess he was bored there. He couldn't find anything else to do. He just went to the library and read their Islamic manuscripts. And then he found a manuscript of Şerafettin Ali Yazdi's Zafername, which included the famous Mukaddime. And then he read the entire Mukaddime. And then when I went to his house, he said, "Oh, I read this text. It's so interesting." And then he couldn't stop talking about Yazdi and his vision and all these occult sciences and everything. And it just happened that at that time I was planning to change my dissertation subject. And then when I opened the topic to him, he just said, "Go for it. So this is wonderful." So he had this broad vision, and then he sort of appreciated different fields, because, and I learned this again later, he actually first, I think didn't want to be an Ottoman historian. It wasn't his intention. I mean, you may correct me if I am wrong, but I think initially he wanted to be a Safavid historian, not Ottoman historian. He had a great love and interest for Safavid history, and he received a award in Turkey in 2014, and then he gave a speech. He received the presidential medal, and in his speech, he talks about how he started his studies, and then he says that Martin Dixon, his supervisor at Princeton University, Martin Dixon sent him to Istanbul to be an Islamicist, like the historian of the Islamic world. And then according to Cornell, in his essay, Martin Dixon told him, like, if you want to be a good Islamicist, you have to learn Arabic, Persian, and Turkish, and not only languages. You have to understand the relationships between the cultures represented or expressed in these three languages. So he had this broad vision right at the beginning. So, like every other good book, you can read Cornell Fleischer's books and articles at multiple levels. Bureaucrat and Intellectual is a good biography of an Ottoman intellectual. But at the same time, if you go to the second level, it's a fascinating work on the transformation that took place in the 16th and 17th centuries. Or his article published in Gesho on Mediterranean Messianism, it's an article on messianic ideas around the Mediterranean. But when you go one level up, it's an essay on the meaning of the Mediterranean. I wish Maite was with us today, so she was going to talk more about that subject. But it's actually so the Cornell's thinking worked like a staircase. Like you talk about one subject, but at the same time, he pushed us thinking at a sort of at a different level. So he had this capacity as a historian. And some later, I was preparing a festschrift for my first supervisor in Turkey, Islamic, and I went to Cornell and I asked him if he would be happy to contribute an article for Islamic festschrift. And I was thinking that he would give me an article on Ottoman topics, Ottoman subject, or something that he was interested in. But he gave me an article on Babur, so the founder of the Mughal Empire. Apparently, back in 1986, let me check, 85, Stephen Dale organized a conference on Babur. And then he invited Cornell to present a paper at the conference. As you may know, if I'm not wrong, please correct me, Kaya would know better. Ohio State was Cornell's first position, first job before.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So Stephen Dale was at Ohio State, and he organized this workshop, and then Cornell presented a paper on Babur, and the short article is called "Companions to a King Errant: Babur and his lieutenants to the conquest of Delhi." So the article is published in the festschrift for Islamic in Istanbul some time ago in 2011. Now, in this article, Cornell does a very interesting thing. I mean, the article is on Babur before he became a kind of imperial figure, as we call the sort of vagabond or brigandage or Kazaklık period, as it is called in Turkish. So basically, when he was a mafia leader, or if I may simplify it slightly. And then in this article, he says that there were two types of people around Babur. One group is the grand commanders, beygs, and the other one is the içkiler, or the inner circle. So, and then he says in his analysis, Babur couldn't rely on the grand commanders, army commanders, because they are prone to change sides. Like if someone else offers a sort of bigger reward, so they could switch sides. But the people around Babur, içkiler, or the inner circle, they remained loyal. So and then Babur's strategy was to connect all these outer layer to the inner layer. So he presents a very interesting story of state formation narrative, and then in the article he says, I will just quote him. In this context, it is provoking, to say the least, that after the reign of Bayezid II, when these most quintessentially authoritarian and centralizing creators of the Ottoman Empire, Selim I and Süleyman I, did their work, the hitherto normal and common term nöker virtually disappears from the archival and narrative record. So he says that before Selim I, the same system existed in the Ottoman system, but with Selim I and Süleyman I, this nöker system, the distinction between the grand commanders, ulu beyler, and içkiler, this distinction disappeared. Now it's very interesting because in standard narratives, we connect this formation of the loyal and Darun group, so to speak, to mostly Mamluks, because Mamluks, the Ghulam system coming from the Abbasids and perfected by the Mamluks, and the Ottomans took it and then turned it into the Janissary system, right? This or Darun system. So this is the sort of standard genealogy that we know. But Cornell here creates an either parallel or connection with the experience of Babur in Afghanistan. So in this sense, he had this ability to see patterns and structures in different contexts, and also appreciate the differences between these two structures. So I think I will stop here and we can continue during the discussion. I highly recommend this article because it's kind of outside of Cornell's canonical pieces, but it's very telling, and also it's one of his earliest pieces, although it was published much later. So it was it's an early piece, and at about the time when he published his dissertation, I don't know which one is earlier. But the thing is, when he gave me the file, because he only had a sort of TypeScript. He didn't have a computer file, and then we had to convert it to a computer file and etc. So I know the first version of the article written in the 1980s. So he didn't change it much. He just changed the references to a sort of better edition of Baburnama. So thank you very much for this occasion, and then I will wait for the discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Evrim. Your mention of that ceremonialism and Cornell's taste in music made me remember a funny detail. Since we are having this sort of free-flowing conversation, I wanted to mention it. He liked this early classical music very much. People like Josquin des Prez, Gesualdo, and Monteverdi, and he listened to those constantly. His music collection at home, I mean, it partially reflected his youth. He did belong to the 1968 generation, so he had a lot of rock and roll stuff in his collection, but I never saw him listening to any of those. And, every year our birthdays are very close, mine and Cornell, so I try to give him something interesting. So I remember one year I discovered this connection between Josquin des Prez and James Sultan. Josquin des Prez has this famous piece called Missa La Sol Fa Re Mi. So apparently the title of it is an ironic or critical reference to James Sultan, and we don't have a lot of evidence for this, but when James Sultan was kept a captive in the papal court, people would go to him and they would ask for favors, and either Josquin approached James Sultan or someone that Josquin knew approached James Sultan. And James Sultan had this habit of saying, Lascia fare mi, let me do it, to people asking, like, he was basically trying to get rid of people approaching him. So La Sol Fare Mi in the title of the composition is Lascia fare mi. In a way, Josquin put it in musical notation, and he composed a missa on it. So I remember one year I got him a copy of this Missa and a photocopy of an article published in the Bibliothèque d'Humanisme et Renaissance in 1992. It's about Josquin des in this connection, and a photocopy of a ghazal by Cem Sultan in which he talks about Frankish boys and girls singing in a court-like atmosphere. He loved discovering those kinds of connections. I mean, talking about Cornell and his historian's profession in general, both of you said really very pertinent things. One thing that I would like to add, to basically summarize what we discussed, is a short passage from the obituary that Rita Koryan and I wrote after him. And it says, quote, "While he is mostly known as an Ottoman historian in Turkey and beyond, Cornell was a scholar of the Islamic world in the mold of Marshall Hodgson. For him, Ottoman history was a particularly relevant, rich, enjoyable case to study. He could comfortably navigate among sources of Islamic history in several languages, using his broader knowledge to create a more profound understanding of the Ottomans. Similarly, he was familiar with European, Central Asian, and South Asian history, their methodologies, and sources. At the same time, Cornell indeed kept an open mind and a keen eye on all of historical scholarship. At the same time, he was confident in the relevance of Ottoman and Islamic history, and he did not feel compelled to make them fashionable for easy consumption and quick recognition. These are some of the defining characteristics of Cornell for me. And I also would like to mention another one of our teachers and mentors at Chicago, Robert Dankoff, had a very similar attitude. I remember one day telling him, Hocam as an Ottomanist, and he immediately corrected me. He said, "I'm a historian of Islam or a scholar of Islam." Like I study the Ottomans as part of that broader picture. I think that in itself was very refreshing for us while making the transition from Turkish academia to Chicago. It was a little bit challenging at times initially, but at the same time, eventually it became very refreshing, this sort of broadening of the mind. And, this is the best thing anyone could expect from a doctoral education. The study of the sources, obviously, but that sort of broadening of the mind and that sense of confidence. I know that especially the Ottomanist historians of Cornell, Fleischer, are sometimes accused of paying too much attention to the European side and this and that, and losing the focus on the Ottomans. I don't necessarily think this is the case. Rather, Cornell gave all of his students the sense of confidence to be able to study other societies and other cultures together with the Ottomans, in conjunction or in comparison with the Ottomans. This was not about, adopting Europeanist methodologies or, looking at Europe as a source of inspiration, but rather, placing the Ottomans or other Islamic cultures at the center of these major discussions happening across disciplines. So in a similar vein, Evrim, what you said about, both of you mentioned the Mustafa Ali book, and I agree with both of you that it can be read as a piece of Ottomanist scholarship. It can be read as a story of state formation across the early modern world. But one thing that is not known, and Cornell didn't necessarily put it in his footnotes or made it obvious, but it is also an exercise in microhistory. When that was written, microhistory was a very fashionable discussion. Can we read an entire period through the lens of an individual experience and this and that? So we could also read Mustafa Ali as a microhistory, not necessarily as an imitation of any, European examples or following, Giovanni Levi and Carlo Ginzburg, but rather bringing the Ottomans to the fore by creating our own contribution. He was really fascinated by the idea of us creating our own methodologies and our own theories as historians of Islamic cultures. He really believed that our work would reach a critical volume at some point, whereby we would be able to create our own, theories and theoretical approaches rather than, looking at other fields.
I think I want to add one thing. I wonder, I mean, this is now, as you say, as you talk, Kaya, it made me think. I wondered if this writing at multiple layers, it comes from Martin Dixon, because I observed the same thing in all other Martin Dixon students. Like the John Woods' book is the same. Catherine Babayan's book is also the same. So you can read those books at multiple layers. If you are interested in one subject, read it, but you can also emulate it or sort of use it at different levels. I think the Martin Dixon plays a very significant role here, because Martin Dixon's work is the same. His dissertation, you can read Martin Dixon's dissertation as a
Safavid
story of
history, Central Asian history.
Safavid Uzbek relationships, but also it's a one of the earliest Islamic constitutional histories, as far as I'm concerned. It's just like it gives you a sort of reading at different levels. I think it comes from Martin Dixon.
Here I'd like to step in, if I may. First of all, Kaya, thank you very much for phrasing. He gave us the confidence, he gave his students the confidence to look at other fields. I think this is very important, so I just wanted to underline that. But apart from that, as a student of Cornell, I think we may start to think about what it means to be an Islamic historian. I think this can be redefined, and maybe it needs to be redefined. I think it's still very meaningful, and I think this may be one of the major issues we face. Why do we study Islamic history? How should we study it? And what's its relevance in this moment of the world? I will not be able to say much more than that, probably because I only feel the need to think over this question. It kind of imposes itself on me as a pertinent, as a critical question, but I haven't produced many ideas about that. Just that I think it's a central issue that we need to address.
What you just said, again, I mean, it is impossible for us to come up with anything that even resembles a solution to it right now, but this need for a reconsideration of our profession, our place in it, reminds me of something else, and this is something that Evrim and I talked about at some length. Cornell as an Orientalist, as a müsteşrik of the old kind, not the kind that is criticized by Edward Said for good reason, but the kind of, 19th century German Orientalist, focusing on the sources, casting a broad net. I remember one day I was jokingly asking him, about his connection, and I said, are you related to Heinrich Fleischer? And he said, sadece meslek ve meşrep itibariyle. Obviously, there was no family connection. I mean, Cornell, and I would say the same thing about others, about John Woods, about Robert Dankoff. They were also a bridge between our generation and the old Orientalists. Obviously, they didn't study under the first or second generation of Orientalists, but at the same time, I feel that in our generation or the generation before, there has been a splitting up of the field. There has been a kind of specialization. There's the Ottomanist niche, there's the Timurid niche, there's the Safavid Uzbek niche, the Mughal niche. And for understandable reasons, we saw the emergence of these subsets of Islamic history that led to the deepening of knowledge in certain fields for good reason, but at the same time, that also led to a narrowing of the overall approach, while people like Cornell and John and Bob basically kept reminding all of us that there's a wider world out there and we have to remain connected to Islamic history. So in a way, our re-identification or repositioning may start with discovering our place in that larger world of, Islamicist scholarship or the history of the Islamic world, and by adopting multiple identities rather than being only a scholar of the Timurids or a scholar of the Ottomans. And again, for that reason as well, I am very grateful to him, uh, in the sense that he was never comfortable or he was very confident, but he never felt too comfortable as an Ottomanist. He always felt to keep thinking about, what else? What else can I bring in? What other connections can we discover? So his Ottomanism never turned into a sort of navel gazing in that regard.
There are some questions, I believe. Maybe we
Yeah.
can go to questions.
I see two questions in the chat. Mehmet Yetkin says, as an early career management history scholar, I wonder how I should approach the legacy of Professor Cornell's. I do appreciate which papers or books should I unpack or delve into? I assume this is a question about the history of bureaucracy or state empire formation and what kinds of classics should be studied. Obviously, I would say Cornell's own works, Mustafa Ali, but also his earlier articles about the formation of the Ottoman bureaucracy. I find those very, very important. I'm thinking of the classics. I don't want to state the obvious and sound patronizing, but Halil
I can
Alcı.
patronize, actually.
Yes, what do you two think of when we talk about, beyond the Ottomans?
Well, before I jumped in, Evrim was about to say something, so Evrim, please go ahead. Asking after you.
I mean, I see three sets of ideas and papers, I think, roughly. I mean, if I may call it like the early Cornell Fleischer, his book is of course the most important text at that time. He was very much interested in bureaucracy and state formation and the transformation of the sort of Ottoman Empire and then the rise of absolutist states and etc. Mostly the debates of 1980s and early 90s. So his book would be a great place to start. But with his article on Messianism, 1993, I forgot the date now, 1993 article, there's a sort of change. So he started working on messianic ideas, and he was planning to write a monograph on the subject. And for that period, I believe his article published in Jesho would be a great place to start. It's called A Mediterranean Apocalypse, Prophecies of Empire in the 15th and 16th Centuries. So this is it was published recently in 2018, but it was written much earlier. It was written 1990, so it reflects his change of mind in the second half of 1990s. And finally, I believe he wrote a very short piece for the Bayezid II library volume, and that little article shows his interest in 2000. So because he was initially, at the end, he stopped following the debates on messianism, etc., as just a sort of occult practice or something, but he was very much interested in the significance of messianic ideas in and occult ideas in and their role in political ideas. So I think that will be the final piece to unpack and to study.
Evrim, you said this as an answer to Arif Erbil's question, right?
No, Mehmet Yetkin's question.
Oh, okay. I see.
Well,
Because
that answers
I didn't read
Arif too.
Arif's question yet. Let me read.
interestingly enough, Arif Bey also asked a question, and you
Perfect
sound like
answer.
you were replying to that. I want to
Oh,
add
I
one
didn't.
more thing. Yeah. No, it's good because I was just gonna transition into that. So you laid out the transition.
Okay. Sorry.
Just before going into that, obviously, in addition to Cornell's work, I would like to recognize, in addition to the classics from the previous generation, Uzun Çarşılı, İnalcık, and this and that, Linda Darling's work on the Ottoman bureaucracy, especially the finance bureaucracy. This is something that Cornell also paid a lot of attention to, that we are not only talking about the bureaucratization, but we are talking about the bureaucratization as a process, but we are also talking about the emergence of different levels of professionalization inside a single bureaucracy. We are talking about the divan bureaucracy, and we are talking about the growing influence of the finance bureaucracy in the Ottoman case as government and the conduct of war becomes a business. It is always a business, but it particularly becomes a major kind of business with the early modern period. So he was very sensitive to, again, not only state and empire formation, but to all of those different layers. But to go back to Arif Erbil's question, and in a way, as I said, Evrim laid out the terrain for us by talking about the major topics of study that Cornell worked on. And as Arif Bey observes in his remarks, yes, it is true that we are able to observe these kinds of shifts. As Evrim outlined, there's the study on Mustafa Ali, and then the next step is this look into Messianism as a study in cultural exchange, but also it is a story of empire formation, as Evrim said. He basically looked. I remember one thing that he says in the introduction to Mustafa Ali. He says that Ottoman scholarship so far was a bit like a skeleton, and he wanted to add some flesh to it. So his work on apocalypticism was at a number of different levels. Number one, trying to add a sort of cultural, ideological substance to the rather dry story of Ottoman Empire formation, and also his urge to espouse, to assimilate things that are excised by the modern scholarship. This overly rationalistic and rationalizing approach to Ottoman Empire formation is this almost secular process that happens, something. This is an interpretation that starts in the 19th century, and then, it is espoused by Barkan, turned into an orthodoxy, and even today, conservative scholars who may be critical of the secularist approaches to Ottoman and Turkish history, regardless, espouse this very secularist understanding of Ottoman Empire formation. So by talking about apocalypticism, messianism, these things that would be seen as irrational today, kind of, trying to render the true color and spirit of how Ottoman Empire formation felt like on the ground in a very intimate level. And the turn to Abdurrahman Bistami, as Evrim also mentioned. I mean, I remember Cornell talking about how he wanted to go back to the 15th century, to a time when the Ottoman enterprise was more embryonic than we see in the 16th century, and kind of go back to the 15th century to look at the entire period as a fermentation ground for all of these different ideas, but also as almost like a graveyard for other ideas that did not necessarily pan out.
No.
So it was a bit like rediscovering Islamic history within an Ottoman mold by going to the 15th century and again adopting the sort of microhistory approach through Abdurrahman Bistami.
What can be added at this point is, I guess, his experience at Topkapı Palace at the end of 70s or mid 70s, I guess, with a group of female historians of art particularly. Now, all of these things that you have said was nourished with a deep study of Ottoman art history or Islamic art history. Zeren Hanım was there as far as I know, Serpil Hoca was there as far as I know, and maybe a couple of others. Now, why is this relevant? Because one of the pieces that opened my eyes to his thinking is his article in Zeren Tanındı Armağanı, and he talks about the male-dominated corridors of Istanbul University. Now, over-rationalization and preparing the skeleton was also skeleton of the Ottoman Empire is, I think, was related to the group who did it, which didn't give voice to history of art, which didn't recognize any space for history of art, and also non-male but really valuable historians. I don't want to make this a gender issue, but I think there was some sort of a gender issue there too. So that period of study was also, I guess, a period of free thinking with a group of historians who did not or could not follow the predominant way of doing history. And I think it inspired Cornell Hoca and others, Serpil Hoca, a lot. So, as we have said, he was open for new fields. I think we have to remember that history of art was also one of those fields, and it should be given its due. Yeah, that's it.
So there is one question by Sam Stevens.
Actually, if there is that question, can I go back to Mehmet Bey's question, Mehmet Yetkin's, Mehmet Hoca's?
Okay, you do that, then I will say something about Sam.
Yes, I was gonna throw Sam's question at you, Evrim.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So, Mehmet Hocam, I cannot really suggest you books or papers, but as I've said, I can be patronizing. I might remind of Cornell Hoca's method or approach. I would say take 3 fields of research: society, management as a phenomena, as practice, and people who did the management, who were involved in management, the people of management, ehle işletme, if you want to call it so. And then know that these are always fluid, they change in time, and they interact. Be sensitive to the interaction, and in each group, try to define a couple of important criteria. What are you going to look at with the phenomena of management? What are you going to look at with the people of management? The details are infinite, but most important factors are generally a couple. And then try to follow how those criteria with the people of management, with the phenomenon of management, and with society interacted with each other. I think that would be an approach that would make Cornell Hoca happy.
So for again on this topic, I think I should say that John Woods edited with the help of Robert McChesney, Martin Dixon's dissertation. So and it will be published hopefully next year or the following. So Martin Dixon's dissertation will be a great place to start in order to understand this general mindset, I believe. So may I continue with Sam's question, Kaya?
Yes, absolutely. I was really wondering how you would reply to that. Like, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I was going to ask you to say a few things. Yeah.
I want to say something about this. I mean, one thing about this sort of alternative ways, of course, it's natural for me to draw a genealogical line between kind of my interests and Cornell's interests, and that's of course true. But we also have to appreciate that, and we should mention that Cornell had other students who worked on different subjects, not just like the messianism and etc. Like Nabil Tikrit's work on Şehzade Korkut, or I don't know, Stefan's work on Alevis, Stefan Winter, and Betül's work on later centuries. So he basically supported work in different disciplines in different areas. Nikolai Antov's work on the Balkans. So I think those works represent sort of alternative pathways in Cornell's thinking.
In the case of Mustafa Ali, one thing that came to my mind recently is whether Ali's time in the Balkans, and it's a very difficult thing to do because Ali himself talks about his time in the Balkans to a certain extent, but not as much as he does about, for instance, his time during these campaigns against the Safavids and the other parts of his life. But the Balkans as a region, as a formative experience in the life and in the career of Mustafa Ali, this is something that I was wondering about myself, whether that was more to be discovered there in general. But other than that, I would say, again, not to sound eulogistic, but it is a fairly complete book in the sense that Cornell did consider a number of different aspects, different pathways, and a lot of the ideas that are in the book may not be able to be investigated further for the lack of sources. But for instance, Mustafa Ali's understanding of himself and people of his generation as descendants of recent converts to Islam, I think is a really fascinating idea that hasn't been investigated that much. That sort of, it's yet another aspect of Rumi identity that, could be recovered as the sort of, this new existence on the western frontiers of Islam, that sort of thing.
And I remember that he took Rhodes Murphy's review of his book seriously. And what I remember from him is that Murphy's observation that he listened to Ali a bit too much in the book, in his work, could be taken seriously. So if perhaps there were a second edition of the book, he could have tried to adjust Ali's voice a little bit, but I don't know to what extent really.
So there's another question in the chat from Fatih Torun. I wonder what you would... So he's asking whether there's a Fleischer school or a Chicago school in Ottoman studies today. Is there such a cluster? What would you say? I mean, one thing that I would say briefly is Cornell created a huge esprit de corps among all of his students. So I don't know if there's a Chicago school, but there's a sort of group spirit that really ties us together very much. He was very adept at creating that sense of belonging to a group to a group of people working on similar things.
I mean, when when you study at Chicago, or when you work at Chicago, it's kind of almost compulsory to create a school because there's a Chicago School of Sociology, Chicago School of Economics, Chicago School of
Anthropology.
why not Chicago School of Islamic History? And actually, Cornell and John Woods worked on a document on this topic. They tried to find out, it was just for internal discussion at the University of Chicago. They tried to figure out what makes Chicago distinct from other places. My personal view is that it is not up to us to say this. It will be if others think that there's a Chicago school, they should define this. But I think I am like personally, that's how I feel. I'm like a fish in the water, so um, I cannot define it. And if I say that there's a Chicago School of History or Fleischer School of History, it will be like a beautiful woman or man saying that, oh, I am how beautiful I am, how beautiful. So it's not, basically, it's not, I think, up to us to answer this question.
Well, still, as a common trait, I think we all respect historical complexity, and we don't shy away from analyzing it. I mean, as a doctoral student, it's not very easy. It can be taxing, really. But seeing it starting from Hudson, and Fleischer was very much in the Hudson tradition.
Yes, it was.
I think they gave us that sensitivity or this curiosity about historical complexity. And this can be like one trait you can see in all of our works, like look at Side, look at Pınar, look at your own works. We try to like identify points of interactions and complex agents and complex phenomena, and then try to tell an account of its transformation. So this can be an answer, perhaps.
So let's take one last question, and if there's nothing else, let's wrap it up. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. So Kaan Özbek in the chat is asking about what motivated Cornell to work on apocalypticism, messianism, the occult. And this is a great question because this is something that sometimes needs to be clarified. Obviously, lately, the study of the occult in Islamic cultures became almost like a subfield in itself, and scholarship and personal belief in the occult sometimes gets confused. So I would like to draw a very clear line here. Cornell was motivated to work on messianism through his study of the reign of Suleiman because he read everything very carefully, and he also knew how to read between the lines. He read as well as a literary critic. And this is someone who read, 15th, 16th century sources with that particular eye. He himself realized that messianic themes played a much bigger role in the political language of Suleiman than imagined before, especially during that particular period of partnership between Suleiman and his Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha. So he basically went to the subject of messianism by identifying it in the sources first rather than the other way around, which I think is the right approach. And after looking at Suleiman, he started, obviously, there's a fairly developed secondary literature of messianism and apocalypticism in European scholarship, and as a well-read person, he was obviously aware of the work of people like Francis Yates, Ottavia Nicoli, And he basically started seeing these kinds of parallels on the European side, which further reinforced his understanding that this may have been a pan-European and indeed quasi-global phenomenon when we talk about political ideologies in the 16th century. But at the same time, he never went to the edge whereby the study of the occult becomes a thing in itself. He always was very careful in anchoring it. And Ertuğrul put it very beautifully. I mean, he always paid attention to these kinds of layers, but to that transformation, he would challenge his own approaches and ideas, and he was very open to look at messianism as well as a sort of constantly changing discourse that could come and go at different times rather than, belonging to this occult subterranean that is always there, or some sort of fantastic approach like that.
I discussed this issue with him once. I think the topic is this occult and messianism, etc. It is in his book as a side issue, but what basically triggered the entire research project, I think, his discovery of Barbara Fleming's work in the 1980s. Because in the 1980s, Barbara Fleming, a great German historian, living and working in the Netherlands, Barbara Fleming started working on those kind of issues like messianism, the Ottoman public, political public, and then those kind of things. I think Barbara Fleming had a deep impact on his understanding of these issues. And he was at the University of Washington. Sorry, he was at Washington University, and then he invited Barbara Fleming to Seattle, and then they worked together on these topics a year or so. I think that really initiated the whole thing. But then, of course, what Kaya said, and the other European.
So let's finish by replying to our old friend Günhan Börekçi, who is asking in the chat about any plans to publish Cornell's unpublished work. The article on apocalypticism that Evrim referenced, published in Gesso in 2018, was in a way, a sort of publication of something that he had worked on for quite a long time, and we as his students wanted him to get it out, and Evrim was instrumental in getting that published. We are also working on a Denkschrift, a memorial for Cornell, and we are going to publish an article that he wrote about Şehzade Korkut, right, Evrim? I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yeah.
And the piece on Babür that Evrim published in the Fleischer for Islamic was yet another sort of unpublished piece that was resuscitated. But other than these, I don't think there are any plans. I don't think there is much else to be published.
I mean, the thing is, as far as I understand, what Koç University acquired is Cornell's library.
Yes.
But Cornell's Nahlas is still to be studied. So that's a bigger work, takes more time.
Yeah.
And maybe in the future, if we discover other things, that's a different project, I think, in the future.
All right. Thank you so much, our participants, for listening to us for an hour and a half. Thank you, my dear friends and colleagues. Our thanks to Koç University for organizing this and for housing Cornell's books. We have another panel on the legacy of Cornell as an Ottomanist that is, I believe, yet to be organized, but I very much hope to see you at that panel as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I would like to also sincerely thank our speakers, Şahin, Ertuğrul Ökten, and Evrim Binbaş. Thank you for the participations, for being with us. Also, I would like to remind that the event recording will be shared on the Suna Karaç Library YouTube channel. Have a good evening and see you next week.
Bye bye. See you.
Thank you.